Hi, I'm Lionel, and welcome to the Threecolts podcast, where we deep dive into the latest trends, insights, and strategies to help you in the world of e-commerce. Once again, we're joined by Ahmed Sanda, our head of insights. Ahmed is our resident expert when it comes to data and analytics, and we love his ability to be able to unravel complex market dynamics and translate them into actionable strategies. Ahmed, please introduce our topic for today.
Hi, Lionel. Thank you for having me on the podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about making the most of winter seasonal product opportunities on the Amazon marketplace.
And before we talk about the report, can you just give us a little bit of insight about your previous analytics experience?
Prior to my position as the head of insights at Threecolts, I worked as a data scientist at the New York Power Authority, in which I was specializing in customer specific reports on energy management and figuring out ways in which our customers could optimize their energy portfolio and additionally also identify cost saving opportunities. And prior to working as a data scientist at the New York Power Authority, I also worked at I worked in a startup for healthcare analytics in which we were helping enterprise partners parse their data, parse their pharmaceutical data in a couple different segments. For example, real world evidence, in which we're looking at actual clinical trials and trying to understand um, what are the most likely pathways for patients who were enrolled in, let's say, experimental drug trials. And we also looked at the business side of things, so analyzing uh, healthcare and pharmaceutical companies' cash flow and understanding what opportunities were available for them to be able to make savings and also provide better services for the patients. And after all that, finally landed myself here at Threecolts, head of insights, in which I'm parsing larger data sets with regard to e-commerce and the Amazon marketplace.
Brilliant. So tell us about this data set.
Yeah, so for the purposes of this report, we're looking at how to make the most of your winter seasonal products. And to do this, we strategize to look at the top 100 sellers from the four specific categories we studied in this report, which are home and kitchen, clothing, shoes, and accessories, toys and games, and sports and outdoors. We picked these four categories because they tend to exhibit highly seasonal behavior. And so we thought that this would be a good starting point for our analysis. And we looked at the top 100 bestsellers over the month of November, and then we back propagated that all the way into the prior year. So we have a year's worth of data on each of the products that we were looking at, their sales trends, and their market share within the categories.
So then what are some of the unique challenges and opportunities that you found when it comes to selling winter seasonal products?
One of the more interesting findings was there are some unexpected successes. So, for example, when looking at things like clothing, shoes, and accessories, we found that there was a sales spike in the month of August. And in thinking about this, we're thinking this is as a result of back to school sales and shrewd sellers looking to get ahead of that winter peak where I guess shoppers generally perceive prices to be a little higher. So looking to save and preemptively get some of your winter products in the months where savings are available.
So it seems like there are some sellers already aware of these peak periods, but then how do you make use of strategy when it comes to approaching these periods? How do sellers work on inventory management? How do they work on their strategies to optimize conversions for these seasonal products?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And in the world of e-commerce, I think sellers are constantly learning, constantly adjusting, and constantly pivoting strategies. And I think one thing our report uncovered is that if you look at the distribution of sales over the course of a year, you can use that in your inventory management. So, for example, in the toys and games category, we found that the peak sales periods are November through February, and all the others fell below the average of the month. So if I were a seller focusing on, say, toys and games, I would I would make sure that my inventory is sufficiently stocked for the period between November through February. And additionally, if I'm creating any promotional strategies, I would spend the bulk of my promotional budget within that period to ensure that I'm able to
Wow.
clear out the inventory that I have.
Wow. So you're saying that they should link promotional strategy to when that inventory they need that inventory to go out. So they're not spacing it out through the year.
There are different ways in which different sellers do approach things, but I think if you are a moderate to like sort of budget seller, I think you're a lot more concerned about ensuring that your inventory is cleared out so that you have space for the next season. And so I think from that perspective, I would highly recommend looking at your sales trends. And in this case, we're looking at sales trends across the United States of America. And it does show that in that specific category, toys and games, November through February is your gold mine. And so I'd focus bulk of my inventory in that period and the bulk of my promotional strategy in that period as well.
So your report also discusses the impact of brand influence on pricing strategies. Can you share insights on how sellers should adjust their pricing based on their brand value?
Yeah, so this was a pretty interesting section of our report, and I really enjoyed doing the analytics for this. And so, to assess sort of the brand influence on pricing, what we looked at was the average price across a category, and then we looked at the price of branded items within that category and estimated the correlation coefficient to that pricing. And what we found was that on average, in, for example, the clothing, shoes, and jewelry section, buyers are willing to pay up to 11.5% more for a branded product. That means that if I'm a seller and I'm selling a branded piece of clothing, shoes, or jewelry, I should understand that and know that I don't necessarily have to discount my prices as significantly, or that the brand that I'm representing is actually resilient in pricing. And so I think these are some of the insights that sellers can use to uncover even more value, more revenue, and on the other hand, we found, for example, in that the toys and games category, the brand effect was really low at about 0.62%, meaning that
Wow.
buyers are very price conscious, right? And that if a product that they want, they deem too expensive, they're much more likely to find a substitute. And I think initially, I sort of rejected that initially because I was thinking about it. I was just like, I love Legos, right? And and like I want Legos. But then thinking about it from the other perspective, if I'm a parent, right, and I have a budget and I'm looking for toys for my kids for the winter period, but this Lego set is too expensive, but there's a similar set at a discounted price, I'm more likely to go with that discounted price. So yeah, I think the important part of this section is to understand your products. So what are the brand effects of the products that you own or that you're selling, and how can I adjust my pricing based on that?
So Ahmed, is that then a result of buyer demographics when it comes to different categories?
I think buyer demographics definitely play a part in this, but I also think that there are definitely some categories that are a lot more price resilient. And I think, for example, like we're talking about toys and games, I think there's ample substitutes in that space versus something like clothing, shoes, and jewelry, where sometimes I guess there's a perception to clothing, shoes, and jewelry that maybe, for example, toys and games don't necessarily have. Or similarly, like sports and outdoors. You know, like if I'm buying hiking equipment, I don't think I necessarily care as much about the brand. I care that it's functional hiking equipment. Versus if I'm buying like clothing, etc., I want to look good, feel good, and ensure that I'm getting a quality product.
So then, considering the price resilience in different categories, how would sellers then align their promotional strategies according to their category to get the maximum impact?
As we discussed, we found that clothing, shoes, and jewelry has a lot higher sort of like brand influence on price. So if I'm selling branded products in the clothing, shoes, and jewelry category, I would be less likely to discount those products significantly. Versus if I'm in, say, the toys and games category, where I know there's a lot of competition, if I could possibly have a discount, that could mean that I could steal some market share. In which case, I could grow my revenue. And so I think it's a balancing act for sellers, understanding the categories of products that they deal in and understanding how they can appeal or attract customers within that base.
This is genuinely helpful. Is there somewhere where sellers can actually get a table? Does a table exist where they can see promotional strategy depending on category? Because I would really love that.
So I would love for you to read our blog article. I do talk about a couple of I talk about the four categories that we've discussed today, and I have in-depth sections on each of these and sort of the promotional strategies that I think would be helpful for winter seasonal products in each of those categories. Additionally, I would love for sellers to reach out to me if there are specific categories that you're interested in assessing further. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn. We can connect, we can discuss, and we'll see how we can assist.
Remind us what are those four categories that you've already covered.
So we looked at clothing, shoes, and jewelry, home and kitchen, sports and outdoors, and toys and games.
From what you've shared, Ahmed, it's clear to see that there are significant seasonal shifts that impact the behavior of consumers. So, what do sellers need to do to better cater to these changes apart from just their promotional strategies?
I think a lot of this also has to do with sellers understanding their customers. As you mentioned, there are seasonal shifts in consumer behavior. And for this specific report, we're looking at the winter seasonal products. And so the shift that we see is that out of season, there's a significant drop off in sales, right? Um, Now, I think conventionally, what most most would recommend would be for you to have promotions to sort of offset those losses. However, that can be a costly sort of endeavor, and so I think what we would recommend is tighter inventory management. Understanding when your products will sell and making sure that you have inventory for those periods, and then if you do have excess inventory outside of that, maybe you can consider promotional strategies for that excess inventory. But I think the ideal for a seller is to not have excess inventory, right? So I think it's more about aligning your promotional strategies with your peak selling periods and getting a head start, right? So if you know when your peak seasonal period is, you can start your promotional strategy a little before that, let's say like 2 weeks before that, to ensure that you're gaining market share. And then you can also use that as a tool to assess what your inventory needs would be. If you see the response to your promotion, and you can use that as an estimator of how much you'd sell for the rest of the period. And I think these are some tips that sellers could use to better optimize their inventory.
So, Ahmed, please have mercy on us. Help us understand what we can then do outside of these seasonal periods. What can sellers do to optimize their sales during those times?
I think one of the key findings that this report also uncovered is that for some categories there are unexpected or off season peaks, right? So, for example, we look at like clothing, shoes, and jewelry, and that has an unexpected peak in the month of August. So that also sort of
Oh,
aligns,
wow.
and in this data set, we're looking at the U.S. market, so that aligns with, say, Labor Day sales and things along those lines. So understanding when those off-cycle peaks may occur and ensuring that you're able to sell out your inventory in that period would also be a way to maximize your off-cycle revenue.
I can actually give you an insight about why we get those peak periods during August. That's when the best albums drop, and you need new clothes to be able to go outside and listen to the best albums.
I love that.
So, in your analysis, you identified some subcategories with high potential. Can you also share some of these subcategory gold mines with us, please?
Yeah, so in this report, we looked at, as I mentioned, the top 100 bestsellers in each of these categories and back propagated them. What was interesting was when you look at the individual categories, the distribution of products within those categories is not even, right, as expected. But for example, in the clothing, shoes, and jewelry category, the largest subcategory of that was clothing and shoes, right? So, not so much the jewelry or the accessories, but focusing on apparel and footwear, if I'm selling within that category, will be beneficial to me. And I think similarly, when we're looking at home and kitchen, I think a bulk of the inventory was towards like outdoor furniture, so things like fire pits or like bonfire type equipment, and also like kitchen appliances. Uh, so um, so I think understanding the makeup of those categories and how would help a seller understand um, how they can allot their inventory to maximize sales.
So then, what would you say to sellers who are watching this and they want to know what the most important takeaways for Amazon sellers when it comes to planning for winter seasonal sales?
Yeah, so I think we have three major tips. First, I think you want to exercise caution and reduce your off-season inventory holding risks. As we've discussed, part of the cost of selling on Amazon is that inventory fee. So if you're able to ensure that the inventory you have is right sized for the right season and you're able to sell that out, you're going to save money on the inventory holding fees. Second, we think it's really important that you align your promotional strategies by category and you leverage specific months for maximum impact. So, for example, clothing, shoes, and jewelry, you probably want promotions January, February, September. Home and kitchen, you probably want to focus your promotions on summer and winter deals and around the prime days in July and October. For sports and discounts, uh, for sports and outdoors, discounts in um, August for the back to school period will probably be a good time. And then we know that and as we've discussed, toys and games, it thrives during the winter holiday period. So you should focus bulk of your promotional budget in that period. And then finally, it's really important for sellers to understand the brand effects of the products that they're holding or that they're selling, and making sure that their pricing strategy is aligned to those branding effects. And if you don't have a strong or resilient brand, you might need to consider adjusting your pricing strategy to be able to capture more market share.
Thank you very much for joining us, Ahmed, and for providing these amazing insights. Where can people find you if they want to get in contact with you?
Yeah, I'd love for you to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find me Ahmed, Ahmed, last name Sanda, Sanda. Please follow, connect, and shoot me a message. I'd love to hear about some of the challenges that you're facing in the e-commerce world, and I'd also like to hear about some of the successes that you're finding. And I hope that we can keep this conversation going.
Thank you very much. And we look forward to you joining us on the next episode of the Threecolts podcast, where we'll focus on insights that help you as e commerce sellers.